Hey y'all, you're listening to
Two Wives and a Spark.
As an interracial couple, we've learned a lot over the years, and we're committed to sparking conversations that build community and explore how race influences everything. Literally everything. So that's our focus for this podcast.
Because we believe that intentional conversations are vehicles for change. We've seen the power of them in our relationship over the years, and we know that when we really listen to each other and to ourselves, we see the truth in new and revealing ways.
I'm Leah.
And I'm Rachel.
You're listening to Two Wives and a Spark.
Hello and welcome back to episode 10 of Two Wives and a Spark. I'm Rachel.
Episode 10, that sounds nice. I'm Leah.
And we are excited to be back here with y'all for another week of sparking conversations that are going to literally be us learning in public yet again.
I think that part, these are conversations, believe it or not, that we have on our couch.
It's true.
So I think they're going to organically just continue to unfold. And again, it's one of the reasons we started this podcast is we got asked multiple times by people to you need to be sharing these conversations with the world. So we're not sitting on a couch right now, but we are still having the conversations that we would be having on our couch.
Yeah. And I got a little blanket in my lap. I'm feeling cozy. We're in our awesome recording studio with our amazing support here. It is definitely such a blessing to have this recording studio and not be trapped in a closet.
My closet that I created. I know it was National Coming Out Day, recently, but I'm just saying. Sometimes it's cozy. Sometimes it's cozy in there if you make a safe world. Okay, it was a little hot. It was a little hot in that closet.
It got real hot in there and during
so
pregnancy
plus
closet.
I get it.
So anyway, feeling really grateful
into a new space.
That's right. Look at us. We've expanded our teeny tiny closet. I will always have love for that closet, but we're happy to be here with y'all again. And this week, we want to build on what we talked about last week and discuss the inevitable resistance that comes with growth. We alluded to it last week, but a lot of last week was really the beautiful side of growth and the beautiful thing that comes with time and space. And sometimes we need to, I think a lot of times, we need to look at the other side that's sometimes harder and less beautiful.
Yeah, because, everything in the world needs balance, right? So there's two sides to everything. The other thing that's driving this conversation, I think, is the idea, the concept, the quote. I'm sure many people have heard this, that the only thing constant in the world is change. And truly, every time I hear that, I think of NDRE. I'm not going to sing for y'all right now, but maybe I'll hold it to the end.
She might. She's known to just let it out.
But truly, that's such a good statement, right? The only thing that is constant, the thing that you know is going to happen is change.
Right.
And growth is a part of change, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to happen. Now, whether you, as we talked about last week, are able to be super present for the growth or not, it's happening, right?
Yeah.
In the same way that change is happening. So we're going to dig a little deeper into that. And we're going to talk a little bit more, too, around just there are some pitfalls and, as we call them, landmines and turbulence along the growth journey happens, and it requires you to also take time and space when it happens, if possible and if you can, because you then learn to not repeat the same thing again so that you don't have to grow through that again.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And as usual, we're going to bring two different lenses because we don't compartmentalize this work, right? There's the way that growth happens on the personal front in our relationship, in our life, and then there's the growth that happens in what we do from 8 to 5, whatever that looks like for folks. For us, we call it professionally. But when it comes to facilitating conversations about race, we're also going to bring that lens because we want to, just bring some multiple perspectives and talk about kind of the intersecting places where growth happens.
Yes. But first, we're going to start with the personal.
Okay.
The personal, because personal is also a word. Personal. The personal side of this. Y'all, audience, we getting close. We getting familiar with each other. If y'all were to come over to the house, you would still need to take your shoes off, actually. But, you'd be close enough with us that we let you get your own glass and your own plate and all that stuff. That's how you know you're really in. Did y'all know that once upon a time, Miss Rachel Rosen, she broke up with me, y'all. It happened. It did happen.
You say it so dramatically. I
Dum,
always
dum, dum.
remember it as a mutual break. We both mutually decided we needed a break. So this is a part of our relationship not a lot of people know about.
It's true, actually. When people find out, it was mutual. I just like to be dramatic and make Rachel look at me with those beautiful eyes. Anyway, but a lot of people, when they find out that we had a break, are like, wait, what? Y'all had a break? And it's like, actually, we wouldn't be who we are today if we hadn't had the break.
Right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that on the personal front, as in terms of the personal story, so that we can share with you all how we grew through that.
Yep.
Because that is a huge reason why we are where we are today, and why there's a little baby in the oven. Little bun in
It's
here.
true, and I think there's a lot that resistance can teach us if we're listening, but it's oftentimes so hard because when you're going through really hard things, the last thing you want to do is like journal about how much you're learning,
Oh, yeah.
Usually want to like scream and throw rocks and run away
And be mad at the
and
person.
be mad.
That's
yeah.
like, because usually there's another person involved.
Yeah.
Like, when I think about the things that have been hard for me, it has been another person that's been involved in it. And it's not until like I'm on the other side that I'm like, oh man, thank you. I really appreciate that person for pushing me in that way.
I
right?
grew so much and da-da-da. Yeah, it's usually really, really hard when resistance comes. Same reason why, like, when you're in an airplane and it's turbulent, most people's brain go to fight or flight. You're like, oh my gosh, this is whoa, breathe, pray, like all the things. You're not thinking like, ooh, let me journal and think about, ooh, what can I learn from this?
It's usually airplane shaking. No,
like, I wonder what the pilot is thinking. Our brain really does self-protect in moments of extreme resistance. And so sometimes what we want to bring to life in this episode is how much resistance can teach us after the fact.
And I think how much we can learn about our resistance, like what it feels like in our bodies, mentally, emotionally, what resistance feels like. If we can pay attention to that, it's a signal to us that there's a moment where we either need to take a break or we need some time and space. The more you can get used to being like, oh, I'm feeling resistance, right? The more you know something's coming. So
that's true.
There's also opportunity there.
That's true. All right, so let's go all the way back, way back to 2015.
What?
We have been dating a little over a year.
Can I holla?
And, we were just talking about this in the car on the way over here, how in some ways we are a very typical lesbian couple, and in other ways we are very much not that. But one of the things that we did that was kind of typical.
It wasn't on our second date, though, so it wasn't as typical.
It wasn't a U-Haul moving, but it was for us, given who we are, moving in together after a year was a pretty big... That was pretty quick for us.
It was pretty quick for us. You have to understand, we were two independent on our own, human beings.
Yep.
And so now, to be fair, one of the reasons we were also doing it was because we lived in the Bay at the time, and it was financially a smart choice.
Yeah, Bay Area, Oakland prices. If anybody who's in the Bay knows that it's not easy.
It was not easy. So that was one of the reasons that kind of blinded what would normally be two clear lenses. That kind of blinded us was the price.
Because we're like rational thinkers. We're like, okay, we're literally spending every night together. What's the difference? Right. I think a lot of people do that when they move in together. Yeah. And
so that's where we were, and we were like, and we're already together. We love each other, so it's gonna happen anyway. This is the time. My lease is about to be up. This is the time.
Yeah.
So that lasted. Like in harmony, that lasted for about 2 weeks before Rachel traveled for like a month, right? You were gone for a month. So technically it was longer that we were quote unquote living together, but
not really.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you were gone for about a month. I was running a summer camp. So we were busy. Our schedules were very opposite of each other.
Yeah.
To this, this point, we had been dating for a year, but it was also, again, there was a friendship here. So there was a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but I think we were very conscious of the steps we took in the relationship because we didn't want to ruin our friendship.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you returned.
So granted, there were some little warning signs or like baby flags that I think happen that you're like, ooh, should I listen to that? No, it's okay. Push past, like there's some little things that happen, I think, for all of us when we're going through major life changes. Sometimes we choose to listen to them and other times we don't. I think there were things that I learned about myself. There were little flags for me that I was like, are you really ready for this? Like in the first couple weeks, there were some little moments that were like little trigger points for me that I was like, oh, I'm not over. I haven't done my healing because I had a year and a half ago, or was it 2 years by that? A year and a half ago, had ended a really significant relationship. And it was a very, very hard break. And so I had some trauma, to be honest, from like my previous life that I was still unpacking and working on in therapy, but I was just starting therapy. So I really I hadn't healed from a lot of stuff. So there were some things that I noticed like right off the bat after a couple weeks that I was like, oh my gosh, am I ready for this? I'm like, whoa, I'm sharing space. And I don't know how to explain it, but I just remember thinking, is this a flag? Are you moving too fast? Have you done your work? Could this be harmful for your friendship? Like I remember those questions coming in.
Yeah, and I think the idea of trying to do too much growth all at once, right? Like you're trying to grow in a new relationship, and then you're trying to, as an individual, grow out of an old relationship, like all at the same time. And so again, back to our point around taking space, there was no space, no time given to either of those moments because you were splitting it.
Right.
You were like, yes, I need to
Work
grow
on this.
into this new spark, right? And then I need to grow out of and heal from this old situation that was happening. So I think to the point that you were making, right, there's resistance there, right?
Yeah.
Because your growth is like, I need to take you in one or the other direction, but I can't do both.
Right.
Well.
And then on top of that, you add in a major life change where I ended a 10-year journey working in a school district, and I started a new job a month later. So I was like ending one big career, starting a new one, and this was all happening in that same summer.
And this goes back to what I was saying last week around the rat race, right? Like we are designed and developed to just, you keep going, especially as women, right? Yeah. You just keep pushing, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. Nothing's going to stop you. Yeah. And so I think the clearer you get with yourself and your abilities and what you're able to take on, the more you know, oh, I'm feeling exhausted, I'm feeling resistance, I'm feeling unmotivated, I'm not feeling like myself. Yeah. There's an opportunity for you to take a pause, which is what we ultimately decided to do as a couple.
Yeah,
so
we did.
With all that going on in Rachel's camp, for me, I was closing out my first summer as a camp director. Is that right?
No, I think you had done
my last summer.
I think it was, you had been doing it for a minute.
Yeah, it was my last summer. Wow, that's big. My last summer, this had been a part of my identity, for my adult identity, especially for a while. I grew up a lot in that space. And so I was closing it out, and I was going to take my first solo trip. And that was pretty awesome. I had also just come out of a pretty serious relationship. So I think I hadn't given myself a lot of time to, I think, recover from that relationship or the relationship before that one or the relationship before that one. Because they each were like, couple months, new one, couple months, new one. I'm a lover, you know. So.
Until she met me, y'all.
And so I think that I hadn't given myself that space either. So Rachel came back from her month away. I went away on my solo trip, came back, and things just felt different.
Off.
Yeah.
We could tell.
We could not align, reacquainted,
couldn't get
reconnected.
In sync.
Yeah.
Like something was just off. We were both in our different worlds, and we were really distracted. Like we were very much in our heads about what we had going on professionally. And just, there were too many ingredients in that pot. And we felt it. Like we both felt the physical discomfort. We were like a little more irritable with each other. We weren't communicating at our best. We were either like not communicating or
arguing.
Which
was not a thing for us.
And that was not who we were. That's just not us. And it hasn't been since then. So we knew, I remember there were a couple conversations that we had where we promised each other, if our friendship is ever at risk, we're going to pause because we were friends first.
Now, we bring this story up because there's a deep moment that happened after we made a very hard decision, right? And the decision was to take space. We knew, and we had, I mean, in true lesbian form, we had the conversation, I think 3 different times to make sure we were sure that this is what we should do.
Yes, we overprocessed that up the wazoo, but also, granted, here we were just like 2 or 3 months into this rental, you know, then that meant one of us needed to find a new place in the already complicated world of the Bay Area housing prices. Like it was very messy.
Yes, it was not going to be an easy transition. But I think the clearer we got about needing to take the space, the clearer it got that there was no other answer. It wasn't like, oh, maybe we take the space, but we still live together. No, it was like, we need to take the space and we need to 100% take it. Like, we can't communicate with each other.
Right.
Can't see each other. And that part, I think, was, people ask us a lot, like, did y'all really stick to it? And it's like, yeah, we actually did. Like, we really did. A month earlier, though.
We did. I think we said we needed a 3-month break, and I think we had like a solid month and a half or 2. I think November, December was pretty solid, but we slipped like once in there. Anyway, it was a good, at least a solid month of no contact, and that was huge for us because we talked multiple times a day. Yeah.
So I think taking that space, taking that time was huge for where we are at right now.
Yes.
Because what it led to was I ended up finding a beautiful house to rent in Oakland with a really close friend of mine, also named Rachel. And that was that house was so healing on so many fronts. And so it was next to a beautiful trail and all these things. So it allowed me to go on these walks. I had my divas, shout out to y'all again, for, folks to talk to and process with while taking that space. And it gave me an opportunity to really reconnect to myself, which I had been unconsciously running from throughout all these breakups. Because for me, I'll speak to myself personally on the love front, feeling love for the first time when you weren't really raised with consistent and unconditional love was like hitting the jackpot. So to then leave space for there not to be that feeling was really, really hard for me. And so that was one of the reasons why I was just jumping from relationship to relationship, because that feeling, it was like a high. It was too good to not have. So having this moment, there was a lot to unpack. There was a lot of healing to do, because it also was an awareness for me around the relationships I didn't have growing up. And I was just bringing that into relationships, right? Like all the unhealing I had done from that was bringing to relationships. So I was in therapy. I was talking about the experience more, taking time with myself more. And what we agreed to is when we come back to check in with each other, if we feel like it is clear for both of us that we want to fully invest in this relationship, that's the only way we can be back together. It can't be one person's sure and the other person's not, or we're a little sure, but let's test it out and see. No, we had to be all 100%, in. Which,
Yeah. And I felt like, I think we even told each other, like the one thing we had to do during the break was to be ready to come back in January and to share with each other if we want to keep going, what we need from each other, what we're willing to give, what we're not willing to give. Like I think we gave ourselves some kind of like, quote unquote, homework, like that typical Rachel and Leah. But I think we did like say, okay, if we're really going to take this time, and it was vulnerable, because if one of us came back in January and said, okay, I really want to do this and I'm willing to work, like we both wrote each other a letter. And in my letter, I remember being nervous. Like, what if her letter says she's not like not in, but we just had to trust the space and the process. I think that space was challenging because we had to develop different habits. To your point, like I would say, even though we're very intentional people, we had some habits that were like, we were just comfortable. We weren't checking in with each other. We didn't have kind of the way of communicating that we do now, where we're really listening for like where there might be some cultural difference and where we might have some blind spots and where we might not be hearing each other. Like I think we were just in this friend zone, plus dating, but it was like very informal. Yeah. And we weren't used to being like vulnerable with each other and like honest about our feelings and going to that next level. And so, all that to say, we just had a lot of growing up to do in that space, I think.
Yeah. And the focus was on growing up to be in this relationship. But I think what it actually did, as for individuals, right, we came out of that. I left the school that we had met at. I went to another school and started a whole new path in my career. You started Spark. Like all these other things developed from that pause.
That's so true.
Right. And like, so I think it was, the gift of this beautiful relationship, but what it also allowed for us to do was make room to develop in all these other parts of our lives. that we didn't even realize we didn't have space for. We weren't reflected, or there was resistance there either. And I think that for me allowed me to be like, oh, that was really a breakthrough moment.
It was.
Beyond just our relationship.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because, it also helped us see who our support systems are. I think we had gotten, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but when you get into that habit as a new relationship, sometimes you become each other's everything. And you're like, I'm here for everything, and I know everything, and I'm your sounding board, and I'm your best friend, and I'm this, and you can, but we weren't leaning on our systems of support. And so I think it also taught us, like, it's not healthy to be each other's everything. and we need space to be able to just, fire needs space and air and like ventilation to actually grow and get stronger. Right. So I felt like we needed that.
Yeah. That definitely helped, I think, tremendously. Because you need a different perspective sometimes, too, when you're stuck in a routine that is not helping you develop or grow.
Right.
You sometimes need to hear someone else tell you what they're seeing for you to get out of that routine. So that it was definitely helpful to reconnect to our communities in that way, too.
Yeah. I mean, everything has been different since that day that we showed up with our letters. I will never forget that restaurant we were sitting at where I read you my letter.
This is a test, Joe.
I don't remember, but I know we had two different conversations when we were re-entering.
I remember one on the couch.
Well, we were on a walk. The first one,
we went to the trail.
We went to the trail for one of them. I can't remember where we were, but I can picture this restaurant where I said, "Can I read you my letter?" We might have gone on a getaway that very weekend.
In San Francisco?
I don't remember. But I can picture where we were sitting, and there was like candlelight on our table. I don't know. It was a cute little romantic restaurant. Anyway, all that to say, that moment changed everything for us. And I think that it created this foundation. It was like the first version of our vows to each other in a lot of ways, because we've really held that pact that we made with each other that January to be really sacred. And I think what it did was open up space for us to hear each other and to be vulnerable and to say, like, this is what I need. Can you meet that need? This is what I don't need. This is what I'm working on.
Yeah, I think it also created a strong foundation, right? I think when we first got together, the friendship was 100% and still is 100% in the core. But I think when we first got together, there was a fun foundation, like a bouncy house, right? Like, it's fun.
Yeah.
I'm not about to build no house on top of a bouncy.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have an inflatable house, right? Like, I guess.
It will bounce.
It will bounce.
There will be no glass
solid,
windows.
Right. And I think what the break allowed us to do was build together something really strong and something really authentic. And so I think with the friendship still being at the core, so it gave us an opportunity to truly build that.
Yeah.
And that's still, we reflect back on that space often.
Yeah.
And those agreements often. I think more so than our vows sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. And that's been 5 years. 6 since because it was January 2016. I guess, yeah.
Oh, that's true.
6.5.
That's true.
However.
Yeah. When we had the conversation, right.
But it was the break. It's been, I mean, we're going on 5 years. Or 6 years. I mean, we're going on 8 years for our relationship. We've had a lot of learning together. And I think the power of what resistance has taught us, and I just feel so grateful for this as we kind of wrap up this portion of the episode. I feel so thankful for our commitment to learning and reflecting together, you know, because I think we weren't reflecting like this during the break. We weren't reflecting like this before the break. Even right after, we couldn't articulate it the way we did just now, but we've always really held this commitment to processing together and listening to each other and learning together. And I think that because we were so committed to like hearing each other after the break, that's why we're here today.
Yeah, I agree.
So thank you for being that rock over these years, my love.
Okay.
I'm trying to get all vulnerable and then she distracts me. So anyway, so that's our part one of this episode, is that, how breaks can lead to breakthroughs.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. And the time that it takes to have a break, to give yourself that permission to take the space, as hard as it may seem. In our experience, the other side of it is always so worth it.
Yeah. So on part one front, if y'all have stories or examples or similar experiences or dissimilar experiences when it comes to breaks and breakups or pause points with relationships and what they've taught you, we would love to hear your story. So feel free to leave us a audio message on Instagram and let us know what that portion of this sparked for you. for sure.
Yeah. Or feel free to, send us an email if that's more your speed.
That's true.
And if you have our phone numbers, feel free to send us an audio note or message on the celly.
There you go. The celly. What is this? Okay. Turning a corner to professional. When we have breaks, how breaks can lead to breakthroughs in facilitating conversations about race and how complicated this conversation is. So, we both facilitate conversations about race and bias and anti-racism on a very regular basis. And we've all been in that meeting or that session or at that retreat or even just in that workplace where we know that something needs to change, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. You can feel like there's some misalignment or there's like some resistance or people aren't actually following through on what they said they would do and it's starting to get to people. You can just kind of see those indicators of when things get beyond just the healthy discomfort. When is it necessary for us to push forward? When is it necessary for us to pause? When does that resistance teach us something about we do need a break? And there's so many layers to this conversation. And I would say this is still like half-baked for both of us because there's so much context really matters in this context, right?
Yeah, I think what I was thinking about, which is why I was taking a minute, and I should probably still take a minute, but my mouth is moving, so I'll keep going. When you said taking a break, like I'm on a break right now, right? Mm-hmm. So when you said taking a break, a work break right now, what it made me think about is the space that is provided for me when all I have to think about is my personal life, right? It does give me an opportunity to rethink and re-examine any conflicts I might have had or disagreements I might have had, or whether that be professionally, personally, whatever the case may be, because I have more room. My brain, I can literally feel my brain have more space to think clearly around the landscape in front of me.
Yeah.
Now, when I think about that in terms of conversations, what's coming up for me is not necessarily the conversation about race, but the interactions that happen between myself and others across different racial lines. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so within that, the conversations that happen, just as, me, Black woman, you, white woman, right? And I think the part around that I'm learning to do the older I get is this power, the power behind speaking to like using I statements.
Okay.
So I think, when I was in college and doing work around, like I went to UC Davis and had a very small population of students of color. And so we were always advocating for like what we needed as a small community on this big campus. Mm-hmm. And I remember speaking more for the community. It wasn't just about my experience, but it was about the experience of others around me. Now, where I'm finding the most impact when I'm in these conversations, especially across racial lines, if something offends me or if I'm curious about something that someone might have said, or if I'm like, that's what you go to sleep thinking about. That's privilege. That's deep. I am finding myself more able to have I statement moments.
Okay.
Like, I felt X when you said Y.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I heard you say. Here's how I understood it. Is that how you meant it? Mm-hmm. And then here's the feeling attached to it from me. That's a new skill. And in some ways, it feels a little bit more vulnerable, mm-hmm. if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Because it is a little bit easier when I am expressing a notion for my community.
Ah.
Does that make sense? Like, when we, like as a Black woman and a Black girl, it is easier for me to speak up about the experience that is happening for Black girls in society, because mm-hmm. I was once in that experience as well.
Yeah.
But if I were to have to speak about my personal experiences as a Black girl in a school system, for example, it's almost a little bit more vulnerable, but that's where my next step of growth is at. Mm-hmm. I'm finding, because it's harder to name how something really hit you or made you feel, or made you see yourself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I told you I was still thinking about it. I probably should stop talking. But
no, I think it makes a lot of sense, because this is why I said there's so many layers to this conversation, because what I think I'm hearing is you're referring to those micro moments where somebody says something and it may or may not be explicitly about race, but it impacts you. And it's clear that there's a racial dynamic at play.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a choice to let that comment slide
Mm-hmm.
or to speak up and interrupt the status quo and to say, hey, can we pause real quick? I think that I heard you say this, and here's how that impacted me. And I'm aware that by speaking up now, the conversation is going in a different direction. Is that what you're saying?
What I think I'm saying, yes, and it requires me to trust my experience, not the experience.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The experience maybe also gives me some backing. Like, I know this, I've heard other people say this is their experience too. And this is not just as a Black woman, but this is also as a lesbian woman. This also as a young woman. It requires me to trust that what happened, whether it was something said or an interaction or whatever, that I can trust the experience I'm having about it and share it.
Yeah.
And that has come with some healing because I have been conditioned as a Black woman in society not to always trust my experiences. Not and the way I've been conditioned to that is to not speak up about my experiences, to not make too many waves, to not, be the angry Black woman, right? And so what that does to my detriment and to the detriment of many of us is that it pushes back our ability to hear ourselves and to grow in hearing ourselves and to then speak up. What I find out is happening right now for me professionally, as I'm thinking through things, I am still having some little bit of that moment where I'm like, am I tripping? And it may not be everyone else's experience. And like having a moment to say like, that is actually okay.
Yeah.
That it's only mine.
Right.
Because mine is just as valid as yours. It shouldn't only be validated because it's also your experience.
Right.
Right. That's the point that I'm making here. Is like when I think about facilitating any conversation.
Right.
In any type of meeting, regardless if it's about race, but everything is about race, right? Is I'm starting to learn the power of hearing my voice and sitting in my experiences. And that's been a huge growth area.
Yeah.
I'm still growing in it like as I'm saying it. Because as I'm saying it, I'm even questioning myself saying it. Like that's how deeply rooted
That's deep.
it is.
That's really deep. Thank you for sharing. I think it's a nuance to this conversation that perhaps isn't always talked about. And like maybe we wouldn't think that act of speaking up is a break that leads to a breakthrough, but I think it actually is. It's a huge break because you're disrupting the norm, or you're disrupting sometimes a system that may be dominated by some white supremacy tendencies and saying like, there's another way. And this may not be everybody's way, but I'm going to speak up and trust my intuition and say that this impacted me or that I have a different perspective to bring to the table. I think that's huge because it's not always these huge breaks and these huge pauses or disagreements. It's really with this work, it's oftentimes the micro moments that fuel or disrupt and cause harm. Like the micro moments matter so much. And we talked about that a lot in season 1, because the discomfort, like how much micro moments add up. What happens is that resistance in your body, if you let that go, you're like, if I don't speak up, then like, because we all are waging, like unconsciously, we're like, I could speak up, but then this would happen. If I don't speak up, then, so all the times that you didn't speak up, what that does to our bodies.
Right.
And what that does to our hearts and our minds and our confidence and our everything. Right. So I think that's a really helpful example. And I know I can't relate. I'll never understand your experience in your skin, but I know that as a woman, there are moments where I have felt like I have had to unlearn a lot of conditioning for me to like just trust my voice, a lot of conditioning that was like, don't speak up and don't ruffle feathers, all that stuff that I think a lot of women in general are conditioned with. And then you add the layer of a racial dynamic on top of that. And there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially when, as a Black woman who's in an organization surrounded by many white women, you can start to wonder a lot about, like, is it just me that's thinking this?
Mm-hmm.
And I share that because I think I definitely got to where I am through my work ethic, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm realizing as I'm there right now is like, oh, it's actually really hard to be like on an island
Mm-hmm.
in the workspace,
Mm-hmm.
especially when everything is about race, regardless of, especially in a school setting. And to get to this place where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's how you see it. So just say how you see it.
Yeah.
So I do think I'm growing in that way.
Mm-hmm.
The other place that I'm like, man, I see an opportunity for more growth
Mm-hmm.
is having more veteran women of color around me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can also hear their experiences and their voices and be like, oh, do I connect with it? Like there's another opportunity for my own growth that I am yearning for. I'm sharing that because I'm having a breakthrough moment in that regard right now, personally.
Right. Yeah. There's so much here. And I think I'm trying to think about if it's worth pausing here or just bringing up this idea that everybody has their zone of proximal development.
Well, I mean, you brought it up, so bring it up.
Should I bring it up?
I mean,
we
if
could
I was
do
a
it next
listener,
week.
I'd be like, what's that?
Okay.
What's the zone of proximal development?
Okay. So when we were thinking about this episode, this came to my mind. So I think a lot of people's biggest fear when facilitating or just even sparking conversations about race at the dinner table or the boardroom or the conference room, the staff lounge, like most people's biggest fear comes down to either I don't want to offend somebody and I don't want to say the wrong thing and put my foot in my mouth. Like those are a lot of fears that I hear a lot, right? And so what sometimes people do is they stay quiet because they don't want to say the wrong thing that could either offend someone or make them look bad, right? And so I think a lot about this idea that we all have our zone of proximal development. We all have our zone of discomfort, like disequilibrium that happens when we're learning and stretching and growing. And everybody's zone is a little bit different depending on the type of learner you are and how you take in information. And so my connection to this prompt about like, how do we know when we need a break or that will lead to a breakthrough in conversations about race at work or at the dinner table is like, it requires so much discernment. It requires that we really know, is this discomfort healthy for me? And maybe what this connects to is like for you, your ZPD, is what they call it in education speak, your ZPD, like you were uncomfortable and that led to you taking action. And your example, like using I statements and saying, speaking up, right? And other people's ZPDs, when they get to that zone of like, I'm just being pushed past my discomfort and I'm either about to shut down or I'm about to give up. Kids have it, adults have it. We all have zones of proximal development. It's a really ripe, but like very fine line between I'm about to shut down and I'm about to make a connection that could really be game changing for me. Like it's a very fine line. And so I think that time and space that is required for me to say, like, to notice in a room, is the discomfort that people are feeling right now okay? Are we good? Or, because we can push past it and this could lead to a really big breakthrough. Or do we need to pause for a second, take a breath, take a water break, come back, and get back to the conversation? It's such a fine line, but I feel really strongly about us, like, working on that discernment and all of us learning to, for me as a facilitator, this is my growth learning edge, especially in the virtual world, facilitating so much virtually. You're really trying to gauge, are people shutting down? Like when someone turns their video off in a workshop or like, you know, you're like, ooh, are we at that discomfort that we need to pause, especially given all the stressors that we've talked about? Or are we ready to take this to that next level and really open it up for people to share and really unpack some of what their connections are personally to this prompt or this idea? So yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it makes me think about when I studied improv, one of the key things they teach you is to try to go with your second choice. Your first choice is your most comfortable choice. It's the one thing that comes to you clearly scary comfortable choice. But if you go to your second choice, that's where your growth will happen, right? That's where your stretch happens.
Yeah.
And in the power of improv, right, your growth is your teammates' growth, because y'all are always working on an and, not a but. And so I say that because it makes me think about how many people go with the first choice. You gave a prompt. It made me uncomfortable because that's not in my zone of proximal development or whatever for where I am right now. How do we as a country stop going to the first, right, and start going to the second?
Yeah.
Especially across lines of difference.
Right.
Because I think people of color often live in the second. And where our leap is, our stretch is to go to the third. Because there isn't a first of comfort that we get to live in for long periods of time.
Right.
Whereas for our brothers and sisters that are white, you get to say, I'm uncomfortable. Let me take a minute.
Yeah.
And some people genuinely take a minute and come back and do the second step. And some people take the minute
and leave
and stay in the minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
They pause in the minute, they go, they're like, I don't need to be
turn the video off.
This is where we are right now in the country, right? Where it's like we're really arguing, we're repeating history, right? And I think the reason why our zone of proximal in adults is probably, especially when we talk about race, probably just as similar to where it is for kids, is because we keep prolonging when we're going to talk about it.
Right.
When we going to go to the second choice and the third choice, right? We keep prolonging it and keep prolonging it. And we keep making excuses why children shouldn't learn it and children shouldn't know this and children, right? And so then those children become adults.
Right.
And those adults become the elders. And history repeats itself again.
Right. And that, I think that piece around like, how do we stretch the zone? How do we get better as adults at stretching our own zone of disequilibrium? Because we can expand it. The more you learn and grow and do this work, the more stamina you have, the more capacity you have for withstanding resistance. Like it's just, you know, back to the marathon episode, like you don't become a marathon runner overnight, but you do actually, you can stretch this zone of disequilibrium, and we need more people committed to that. Because, you know, you can have a 2-hour learning seminar and get to the second hour and you haven't drank water, you haven't had a bathroom break. Like there's a zone there that people need a break, and then you come back and you pick back up. And I think that's a really important point, that like our observation is that people are choosing to take a break and not come back. And that, especially white folks. And that is problematic because we have so much work to do and we are so far from where we need to be.
And I'm not suggesting that you just come back for the sake of coming back either.
Right.
I think when you take the break and you say to yourself, whatever you say to yourself, let's say you say to yourself, that's too uncomfortable. That is the second step. Why is this so uncomfortable to me? And unpacking, right? Because I didn't learn that, because that's not the history I understood, because that's not what my parents told me, because that's not my experience in the world. Because and naming where this discomfort, because once you can start naming things, you can start breaking them apart. And start figuring out how else to tinker with it. We have given up on the tinkering.
Yes.
Right? We've gone straight from like, you got to know how to build the ship or get out.
Right.
And like that, I don't know. I think that doesn't work.
It's
like,
really...
I think it doesn't give us an opportunity to be human with each other. It doesn't give us an opportunity a part of growing is making mistakes.
Yes.
Right? A part of growing is getting tired and being like, no, why is this so hard?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm saying, you know, I just started back in grad school, and you saw me a week ago. Like, I want this assignment to go away. Like I'm smart.
I'm tired.
Because what was happening is it was pushing me to question my intellect. I'm like, I do all these mediations with parents across difference and support kids and behavior and help staff feel like they could keep the joy. And I can't do an annotated bibliography, right? Like I can't without stressing about it. But no, you're doing something new. And so, of course, it's going to take more time. Of course, it's going to take a different part of your brain that hasn't been stretched for a very long time.
Right.
We almost have to tell ourselves there is no quitting on it.
Right. No. If for anybody who's listening to this, we assume that you're in this for the long haul, that you're in this for racial justice, racial equity, which means We may not see it in our lifetime, right? But we will not give up on the conversation, on the work, on the fight. And so that means we don't get to take long breaks.
Yeah.
That's period.
We do get to take the time and space to reflect on what we're learning so we can continue to grow.
Yep.
We do get to do that. And a part of that is saying, I'm taking a break because I need to connect with myself about why this is making me uncomfortable.
Right.
Or I need to go talk to, my trusted friend who told me, when you get here, come see me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need to go do that now. I need to cash in that ticket.
I wouldn't even call that a break. I think in my brain, I was thinking a break is inaction.
Okay, that's good.
Like,
That's
you
good.
don't
Okay.
get to not reflect, listen, observe, notice, do the work, do the reading. Like, all of that stuff is action. Reflecting is action. It's an active part of the work, you know? But I think the pausing of any action, any reflection, any noticing, any discussion about how things are playing out on racial difference, I think for any parent who's listening especially, your kids are watching, If you happen to be white and you're a parent, your kids are paying attention to what you talk about, what you don't talk about, what you choose to read and lift up. Like, children notice everything.
And it's funny because they either notice it currently in the moment or they notice it years from now when they're adults.
Yeah.
Like, no, we never
had
those books.
Yeah.
We never had those conversations. We never, the amount of friends we have, that talk about, like, we never talked about this when I was a kid. We never,
Right.
my parents never brought this up. My parents, and my parents are the sweetest parents on the planet, So I'll even push to say, like, I agree reflection is an action. I think sometimes that's our first choice. I think there's a subgroup of people where the first choice is, I'm going to hear the commentary and then I'm going to reflect on it.
Okay.
Right? Like this podcast. I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to reflect on it.
Okay.
And that's not uncomfortable to me. So to me, maybe that wasn't something that you did 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's growth. But if you find yourself being able to easily go to, I'm going to reflect on it.
Yeah.
Then it is also time to go to your second choice because growth is excited and ready to happen. Now, if you don't find yourself listening to this or reading a book and wanting to reflect on it, then there's where your growth is, right?
Right.
That's an opportunity to do that action.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that brings me back to my whole reason for, like, should I bring this up? Should I not? Like, but it all comes down to ZPD. So I think that our parting takeaway here is, like, if you know your zone of discomfort and your zone of disequilibrium, aka your zone of development, your proximal zone of development, you know if reflecting on your own experience is that stretch that your muscles hurt and you're almost about to give up, but you want to stay with it. Like, that's the type of stretch that we're talking about. We're not talking about, because there really is no blanket. This is why it's such a complex conversation, and how at the very beginning I was like, this is half-baked, because it's still so contextual. Like, each person's context matters so much, and it requires, like, heightened self-awareness. Not what so-and-so is posting on Instagram, not what so-and-so said at the book club. It's like, only you know if you are stretched to the point that you are uncomfortable and you almost want to give up. And you've done this again and again and you've stayed at it, so you're going to come back again. Only you know what that stretch is. And so for some people, it might be sharing this podcast with two friends and saying, let's go have coffee and talk about it. For other people, that's like a huge leap for one person. For the other person, that's like step one. And for them, journaling is the hardest thing on the planet, So everybody has their own step, and it's not about one step. It's about multiple consistent steps again and again. And then knowing when you need to take a pause and get some water and come back, right? I think that's what this whole conversation is about.
Yeah. I think it's about that. And to just echo it again, I think it's about rechecking in with ourselves so we don't get stuck in one phase. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because that's how the work keeps going. That's how the growth keeps happening. That's how the learners keep learning.
Yeah.
It's just making sure we don't get I don't want to even say don't get comfortable, because I think comfort is important in the process. But I think once you realize, like, no, I do this. That's actually the first thing I do. Then it's like, okay, let's move to the next
second
thing you do.
Yeah. And I think we invite our amazing listeners to also think back to what Leah was sharing too, around like, what are the moments for you where even if your voice shakes or even if you're uncertain,
right, yes,
you are noticing yourself speaking up more? Like, is that the second step for a lot of us, that we need to actually use more I statements and bring it into the personal a little bit more? Yeah. I think that's some beautiful stuff for us to reflect on.
Yes.
All right.
Ooh, y'all getting it out of us, huh?
I know. We weren't expecting it to go there, but it did. And so, yeah, I mean, I think just to recap some of our questions for you all this week, to really think about what's your zone of proximal development? Like, what's that stretch zone for you when it comes to conversations about race? Every conversation has race in it, if, as Leah said. So like saying the thing when there is a racial dynamic. What's your zone of proximal development? What's your disequilibrium, discomfort? What are you noticing about yourself when it comes to that discomfort zone? And then what things have been hard for you to say out loud about your experience when it comes to, sharing your experience. Yeah.
Regardless of race. What has been hard for you to share out loud with others about who you are and about your experience? What has been hard in terms of hearing your own voice? Like, what spaces is it hard for you to hear yourself in or to speak up in? I think that's important for everybody.
Yeah. And then the last one is, what breaks have led to breakthroughs?
Yes. That's the overall question.
Yeah.
We'll put that up on the gram so y'all can share your thoughts with us.
Yeah.
And as always, we look forward to talking with you next week. There we go, huh?
Yes, we look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to connecting with you all between now and next week. Definitely excited to keep the conversations going.
Until then, y'all, sending you love and light.
Thanks for joining us today, y'all. We'd love to stay connected on Instagram and Facebook, so you can find us at 2 Wives and a Spark, all spelled out.
If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend so we can keep the sparks of connection going. If you want access to our episodes as soon as they drop, click that subscribe button. Every rating and review helps others find us, so thank you in advance for letting us know what you think.
And special shout out to Journey Girl Magic Productions.
I'm Leah.
And I'm Rachel.
Thank you for listening to 2 Wives and a Spark.